road, there's a structure there? Is that what you mean?
No, just some property
His
on
street
the,
is opposite.
Oh.
yeah,
You're going this way, but he needs to go that way.
sorry. It would be on the south side of Hallam there.
South side of Hallam, which is, that's the deed restricted, side of the Aspen Villas?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
The last option that we considered was one called 3-lane shifted. This is shifted even further south than the faster. So this would be the most right-of-way acquisition option that we looked at. It presents the greatest impact to the site simply because of that right-of-way acquisition. It also has the least impact to traffic because this is the only option where we could fit 2 lanes of traffic during all phases, meaning each direction could continue across the bridge during all of construction. We do have some trees, obviously, that would be part of the acquisition in here, or impacts, I should say, in here. We do have the 2 lanes in each phase, and then we have, I should point out, considerable impacts on this one, and really it presents considerable risks on this one, that we have that right-of-way acquisition. We do get closer and closer to that one residence that you were just noting. Keeping in mind that this was concept level study, it could be potential that we have to take that property as part of this option. So it does present the most impact in that respect and the highest risk. Contractors probably would not build over top of a house, even though we're up above it, they wouldn't take on that risk.
One question for all 4 of these scenarios is in terms of pedestrian routes, did any or all these contemplate alternate pedestrian routes, either above, below, arcing beside,
Yeah.
other side of the bridge? Were all those options contemplated, or any
Yeah,
of
we
those
consider
options?
pedestrian routes on each one. There's sometimes where we couldn't accommodate pedestrians on the bridge. Some phases we can, and the phases that we cannot, we would be routing them in that path that goes underneath the bridge and protecting that path. There would be occasional closures on that path because we'd have to have some construction operations where people can't be underneath there.
Yeah, I was specifically talking about the permanent solution, not the temporary
Oh,
during
okay.
construction.
We have pedestrian routes on all of them in the final configuration. It's during construction that we may not be offering pedestrians.
Right, again, were alternate pedestrian solutions contemplated for the permanent solution?
Bill, they were contemplated, but the difference is the impact of separating out a bridge. You'd be acquiring all the space underneath for the pedestrian bridge, so we didn't think it was economically viable.
Okay, but we contemplated going up, we contemplated going down, we contemplated going on the other side of the bridge, all those things were thought about?
We didn't contemplate going down below it. If that's a direction council would like, we'd have to look at that.
It's feasible, I just wanted to make sure these things were thought about.
I think given the terrain, it would
Yeah.
probably be pretty improbable that we could go
ADA
underneath.
requirements, yeah.
I think ADA would probably prohibit us from being able to go that route. It would be a lot of winding path to go underneath. We did look at a bridge in some of the ABC options. We looked at a bridge to the north for just pedestrians only. Again, that's considered outside the right-of-way, so we'd have to take that into account.
Thanks.
Sure.
Do you have a question there, Ward? No, but there is another bridge. It's a few blocks away to the south, the pedestrian bridge that is in existence now. But and I remember going through that with the Hallam Street improvements, and that was judged to be, people wouldn't use it.
So speaking to the point of not eliminating the pedestrian route across the bridge completely and relying on the bridge that is just a few blocks away, that was not explored.
The bridge that's just a few blocks away leads into the Merle property, yes. And that, you'd have to basically go around the site. I think it's like a 2-mile detour if you went around that way. Underneath State Highway 82 further to the east.
But in these 4 options that are presented, the pedestrian route is maintained on this bridge.
On the bridge.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you.
On the north side only.
Right.
I did mention ABC a second ago, so can we do accelerated bridge construction? I know this is something everybody's always interested in. Usually with accelerated bridge construction, the benefits are trying to improve the site constructability, reducing project time, looking at work zone safety, not only for the workers, but also for the traveling public. What we saw with this one is it's really not that feasible. One reason is we don't have that viable detour. The only detour that's currently in place is Power Plant Road itself, which would be underneath a lot of the ABC options that we would be trying to do. The second would be the nearby residences. A lot of these options for large-scale ABC would be adjacent to the existing bridge and then moving into place, and those residences would conflict with that. The tight curves underneath presents conflicts for some methods of construction. And then the narrow footprint, obviously just the right-of-way itself, it makes it difficult to build for certain ABC options. While it's not considered ABC by definition, probably the fastest method of construction would be if we had a full detour somewhere else, and then we're able to just demolish this bridge, and then rebuild in the same spot. Would be significantly faster than the 4 options that I presented. So that would be your fastest mode of construction, but requires a full detour somewhere else. So I guess in terms of detours, I'm gonna pass it to Doug, because he's gonna talk through all the detour options.
Sure, thanks, Beth. And, you know, whether we're doing rehab or replacement of the bridges, we're talking about a phased construction. And with that, you know, we're looking at how we're gonna phase traffic, pedestrians, and also the utility relocates across there. And I just want to point out that there are numerous utilities in this bridge that provide internet and communications, and there could be some outages with the phased construction that would, the residents would have to endure for short durations. There's going to be some oversized load restrictions. Right now, we're setting that limit at 14 feet for the phased construction we have across the bridge. We looked at a method that doesn't use a detour, and it's called an alternating single lane. Basically, we'd set up a signal on each end of the bridge, and since we only have 1 lane available, we'd alternate traffic. But we estimate using that we'd encounter a delay of up to 7 hours inbound for traffic, and that we feel like that's an untenable option for people. I don't even want to go too much detail on that one because it's just bad. So we feel like there's a need for a detour because we can provide 1 lane over the bridge, but then we'd have to provide another lane for some of these other options on a detour, and I'm going to show you what those would look like. And again, these detours are going to be 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for the duration, the construction duration. So just because the bridge crew left because in the winter doesn't mean the traffic is going to be back on the bridge, right? There's still going to be cones set up, and it's going to operate 24 hours a day. So with the West End detour, this is basically the detour you're used to with Power Plant Road. We still think there would be up to 5 hours delay and gridlock in the city with this delay. This is an outbound detour. Basically, on the graphic there, you see the blue dash line that goes down 7th Street to Smuggler and out Power Plant Road and Cemetery Lane. That would be the outbound detour. We would have to make improvements on Power Plant Road, convert it to one-way, make some other geometric improvements, and we could probably increase capacity slightly on that, put a signal up there on Cemetery Lane to clear that queue out. But again, this detour, you know, maybe we'd put about $3 million in improvements, and it would still be an unreliable detour because at times the construction crew would need to be closing that Power Plant Road to move their stuff around, stage, and so it would be interrupted. So it's not reliable, and with the delay, the user costs are just not beneficial either. With the temporary detour, this would be for the inbounds, so that purple dash line, that would be an inbound detour that would cut across the roadway easement across from Earl Thomas open space, so it's already there. What this really means is a secondary bridge is required to really make travel time negligible for the users. We think there's a capital cost of about $13 million to make to build this detour, but again, your users are going to have a lot less user costs because there's negligible travel day. Outbound would still go across the 1 lane, the purple solid line there, across the 1 lane on the bridge that's being constructed. Sure.
Does this use the existing pedestrian bridge, or is this a new temporary bridge?
So this would be a new temporary bridge, but we would allow this to handle pedestrians in the meantime. So we could divert all pedestrians over here so they'd have a safe route and not go across the construction too. So this is another benefit of an inbound detour.
Can you give me a 30-second spiel on how a temporary bridge gets built for only $13 million?
Well, a temporary bridge looks a lot like a regular bridge. You know, we would build, but it can be a temporary, the difference is you tear it down the end. Actually, on I-25, this spring, we're gonna be building temporary bridges to shift traffic over, and we're gonna tear those temporary bridges back down. So there was a benefit to that, and we see a benefit to a temporary bridge right here. I guess what I wanna add is, this is feasible because of the easements there. It minimizes delay for both directions of travel and provides also a redundant emergency evacuation route. Now, at the end of the project, you can come back in and remove this detour and take it out. But during construction, you have that redundant emergency evac.
Why is it so much less expensive than a permanent bridge?
Well, this is narrower, so we're only gonna build one lane across the bridge, just minor shoulders across for that temporary bridge. So it's not as big as a bridge, okay?
The design life isn't 50 years.
And
So it's truly designed to be ripped out.
Yeah, it's designed to
There's
be
not a risk that someone says to keep it.
yeah.
Got it.
Does it also come in, like where that line shows it, basically at Cemetery Lane? Is that,
We think there's an advantage to pulling it off early before Cemetery Lane, pull that traffic out of the signal and bring them in. So that's where the negligible delay comes in, right?
but after the roundabout?
Yeah, after the roundabout. You mean, we'd come inbound
Yeah.
from the roundabout, pull off. It looks similar to what your PA would look like.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
think you're
temporary.
asking maybe about the easement, the location of the easement itself versus what maybe our pink line.
I'm
shows.
just wondering how much it cuts into the open space and whether
Gotcha.
it's more of like an S curve or more of it's a straight line towards
It's
Main
like,
Street.
it would be an S curve for the speeds, yeah.
To clarify, that would likely follow the right-of-way already owned by CDOT through that area. So they're benevolent in letting us treat it as open space right now, but it's actually not.
Beth had mentioned that the best solution is to demo the bridge and build it as quick as you can. And to do that, you need a two-way detour. You could explore this being a two-way detour as well. So this slide is kind of a bridge replacement comparison summary. Basically, we've taken each bridge option, rehab, two-lane replace, three-lane centered, faster, and shifted, and then put in some opportunities and constraints on the far left column, like maintenance of traffic, traffic travel time impacts, schedule, right-of-way impacts. And basically, we kind of color-coded them, so it's kind of a quick visual. So basically, the green bar would represent more favorable than the yellow bar, and yellow bar is more favorable than the red bar. But I guess what I want to point out is there's nothing that really jumps off the page that's one's more favorable than the other one. They're all kind of have their unique characteristics. If you look at rehab, there's 4 green buttons, but your service life is, minimal. We don't know how long that's going to last. This is a comparison of the costs, and again, these are overall project costs for each option, and these are estimated. These are at a concept level. More detailed engineering would be needed to refine these costs. These costs are in 2024 dollars. So by the time you actually went out and did something, that's going to be some inflation to these numbers. I want to just point that out. Again, they're all conceptual costs, and they range from $44 million for rehabilitation up to $82 million for the 3-lane faster. You might see the 3-lane shifted is coming in at $69 million. That's kind of comparative to a 2-lane replace, but what's different is there's not a detour for the 3-lane shifted like there is for the other 4 options. And I want to caveat that $69 million for 3-lane shifted. There is, Beth pointed out, that risk of working with over that one property that could be a potential full take, and we have not accounted for that because there's a possibility it won't be, but there's a risk there could be. And we've kind of grouped in the different buckets of construction costs, planning and design, right-of-way, TCEs, and construction management and PI. And basically, just showed those as percentages for your benefit. And we'll pause for bridge questions.
Council members, any questions on the first 2 parts of this presentation? John?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how to put this. Okay, so I'm not advocating for the record of decision as it sits right now, the two-lane bridge aligned with Main Street through the Merle open space and 2 lanes out over the current Castle Creek Bridge. If we did go that route, though, it seems to me that that would take less time to complete the project because the new 2-lane bridge would be built first, and we'd be using the existing Castle Creek Bridge. And then when it came time to replace the Castle Creek Bridge, all of our traffic would shift to the straight shot. Can you tell me how much, and maybe you didn't study this or look at this, but would there be a significant time difference in constructing it that way? And what would that time difference be?
So you're basically saying if we built a new PA bridge?
Yeah.
Yep. So obviously you're building that completely offline, so there's no, nothing slowing that contractor down to build that bridge. So that can be put up pretty quick. And then you can put traffic there and address your other bridge. So there is going to be a significant savings for doing it that way, yes.
No straight shot.
Not advocating for it, just curious about the time difference in construction.
Thoughts on timeframe?
Timeframe, I think with the new bridge, like you're talking about, it would probably, again, it goes back to that construction season. It would be 1 to 2 year, but like he was saying, there's not anything impeding us on that. Same thing for the existing bridge. If you then replace that second after you build the new one, it'd be about 1 to 2 years, probably more towards that 1 year, because that one's a narrower bridge.
And the reason I ask is because just reading through the packet and listening to your presentation, it does, the 3-lane shifted bridge seems to be an attractive proposition, but to me that entails building a temporary bridge, and I don't know, I'm of the line of thinking that if you build something, it should stay there. Anyway, these are things I'm thinking about as I mull which path we're going to go forward on this.
Just a couple questions for me. I have some notes about the metal corrosion, structural. You kind of answered a little bit in the rehabilitation option. It said something about 80% of protective coatings have been worn away or are non-existent at this time. Is that something that we should be reapplying, putting on, or is the metal beyond that? What's the current situation with 80% of protective coatings are not being utilized?
Yeah, correct. With the inspection that they did, they identified that, and that's basically just like you would see out there if you're looking up for the bottom, that steel or that silver color that you see on the steel. It's just like the protective coating is similar to a paint. For those 2 exterior girders that hold up the sidewalk, we were replacing those similar and then have that same coating on those. The coating that we would have on the 4 on the inside that hold up the roadway would have that applied as well, reapplied as well. So in that respect, it's similar to a painting process where you'd have some level of cleaning and then they reapply that protective coating.
And then we talk about the rehabilitation option, costed out here at $44 million is what I see in my memo. In that scope of work, what would fall on us? What would be partnered with CDOT? What would be taken by CDOT and the like? If we were just to leave this meeting today and say, we want to start working on some of these repairs because at least the worst part of it and work our way into it, who would be partnering in on repairing this bridge that we don't own?
I think it would depend on the final scope. There are certain elements, as you saw in like the 2018, when you guys widened the sidewalk portion, and correct me, Pete, if I'm saying this wrong, but the sidewalk portion, I think, was paid by Aspen.
We funded that fully. We haven't had those discussions to this level yet until we understand your direction, and then we can bring it up with CDOT and see where they're at with that. But generally, they have a path, and they don't veer from that path unless there's some kind of payment from the city that's pretty substantial.
Assumed. And then you talked about when a bridge reaches level 4, CDOT will take action. What does that mean? What does take action mean?
Fair question. Usually when it hits a level 4, when it's poor, if there's emergency requirements, that they would do those right away. They would implement a contractor and do those repairs right away. If it's not emergency repairs, they will then put it into the Bridge and Tunnel Enterprise. It'll be eligible for funding from there. And then they would start the process of trying to get funding from that. And then I think based on what CDOT has said, they will then replace the bridge on the PA alignment as they had planned to do. So if it goes down to a level 4, that's the direction they would be going with replacement.
And then I had a question about the 4 options, all including a pedestrian route on the Castle Creek Bridge in the current alignment. Why did we not look at not having the pedestrian connection there?
I'll jump into that.
Okay, sure.
There's a lot of history where we split, and we've done the studies that have shown that that's really a widely used path. If you remember, before we put that in, there was a lot of conflicts with the pedestrians and bikers on that and having to jump into traffic. And so we actually showed how much of the use is 50-50 between that and the other bridge, because really, Main Street splits the city, you know that, you have north and south, and so we didn't cut that out because that's such a useful piece of our mobility.
And just to tack on to that, the existing that's out there now is 8 foot, and we would be proposing widening it to 10 foot, which is what Parks would have wanted if we could have fit it onto the existing bridge back then in 2018.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah, mine dovetail with Tori's on the rehab, $44 million rehab. Same questions on funding, understood the answer. But even if we use a preferred alternative, we're going to continue to use the Castle Creek Bridge as it exists now. Is that 44 million going to be, is that bridge rehab going to be needed regardless of what alignment is chosen?
Over a period of time, there will be rehabilitations that have to happen on the bridge. The period of time of when that occurs is really up to CDOT. So I can't state exactly when it would happen, but there would be, like I said in the slide, there's some that are short-term and some that are long-term. The long-term ones would have to happen within several years, while the short-term ones would probably be more near-term repairs by CDOT. But over time, if you wanted to maintain the bridge as it was, not replace it, it would have some level of rehab associated.
And I gathered from the answer, I think it was Pete that said that it depends, or perhaps you said that it depends on what the long-range plan was as to whether CDOT would pay for it. So if the preferred alternative is chosen, would CDOT pay for the bridge rehab in the short term until the new bridge is constructed?
That's a good question.
You're getting into a lot of cost differentiations we have not had this discussion fully with CDOT yet, and we're awaiting kind of a direction that you're interested in. I would keep it in mind that the city of Aspen, with a lot of these directions, are going to be responsible for a lot of the payment. Now, you know, what that looks like right now, we can't tell you.
Yeah, and my overall, after reviewing all of these options, and thank you for the in-depth analysis and options, a 3-lane, you know, we make decisions, we should be making decisions for long-term with the future of 50 years as we make a decision. And when any one of these options for a 3-lane bridge is constructed, it's, in my mind, it's not meeting the future needs of this town. So from what I'm seeing, a 3-lane bridge, whether it's 2-in, switchable, whatever it is, just don't answer a number of the community concerns that were considered during the whole process where we arrived at a recorded decision in the preferred alternative. I have advocated for this study. I want to know exactly what it would cost, what our options are in the current location. After looking at all this, I just don't see how a 3-lane bridge meets our our duty is making a decision to plan for the future 50 years out. Thank you.
Sam?
Yep, I'll go ahead. I sort of take this as forced choice, process of elimination. I do not think the preferred alternative is a good solution for our community, straight shot, whatever you want to call it. I see a lot of members of the Cemetery Lane community here, and I know how it negatively affects them, especially in its current form, so I just want to throw that out there. Two-lane replacement really does not make any sense at all, because why would we replace it with the same? And the rehabilitation, like you said, an insignificant rehabilitation for $44 million also does not seem to make sense. Leaving my one question, the cost that you presented earlier, that is without a temporary bridge in place, right? Because those cost numbers, the 69 million would be adjusted if it's, yeah, so like if we had 3 lanes centered and we were trying to demolish and build 3 lane center as quickly as possible, and we had a temporary bridge and 1 lane, I guess, left over, I don't know, like, how does that affect the cost and timeline?
So these costs right here for 3-lane center, 2-lane replace, 3-lane faster, and even the rehab, all factor an inbound detour, 1 lane, okay? And 1 lane out across the bridge. So we didn't explore the cost of a 2-lane detour, and we could do that, though. I want to also add that during this phasing, 1 lane each direction, transit is intermixed with the general traffic in that lane. So there's really no priority during this time period for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever duration it is.
I understand that. I guess the biggest thing, and this is the value I signal, is like not wanting to go through the Merle open space at all, but understanding we might temporarily need to. I do consider that area to be sacred, and when I think 75 years into the future, I hope it still is untouched and sacred. So the direction that I would like to give is 3 lanes, maybe an alternate lane, but I really give priority to 2 lanes, at least outbounds, and that traffic out of town should be prioritized. Potentially, I think leaving the area where the preferred alternative is potentially for like a light rail bridge in the future alone could be a potential thing. It doesn't need to go through the S-curves, so that's still untouched and still out there. But I would say 3 lanes, whether it be centered, faster, whatever, but I sort of gather that the temporary bridge route might be the way to do it in the quickest and most efficient manner.
We're not really at this point yet. We've got more presentation to go, so you don't need to weigh in on this at this time.
Yeah, I can do it
I think,
with the S-curve stuff too.
yeah, I'd love to see the rest of it, so.
Great.
All right,
All right, so we'll move into the S-curve modifications. Basically, this is to address traffic and congestion issues through the S-curves. And for both of these options we looked at 2 different options. We looked at improving pedestrian and vehicle safety. I'm going to note there's 23 crashes in 2022, and this is a trend up, okay? So the crashes in previous years were lower, so crashes have been trending up. We considered reducing the friction of outbound traffic flow, and I'll go over that here in a second. We wanted to facilitate the movement of large vehicles through the S-curves, so being able to handle a large truck as well as buses. And each option looked at matching a specific bridge, at whether we matched a 2-lane bridge, which is out there today, or a future 3-lane bridge. And then also not precluding the use of an alternate fixed guideway transit system in the future, because that's what really set the control of the geometry through softening of the curves, okay? So this first option is what we're calling the existing bridge. This is something that could match up with the bridge you have today. I'm going to orient you to the legend a little bit. So the orange is noting a dedicated bus lane in each direction. The blue is sidewalk improvements. There's a tree symbol with a line through it showing tree impacts. There's also some access eliminated. There's a stack of books there showing a historic property impacted. That's in the corner there of Main Street and North 7th. That's the Christian Science building in that bottom corner there. There's impacts on that corner from softening the curves, mainly some trees taken, as well as some sidewalk improvements and some property needed for that, to accomplish that. There's also the zipper symbol with the line through it, meaning we're gonna remove the zipper lane and convert that more to a typical merge that more traffic, or general traffic generally expects. Instead of going inbound to outbound, you're going outbound to inbound. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the pinch point slide. Basically, what we're doing though with this to improve outbound traffic flow and maybe decrease accidents is we're eliminating the accesses with 8th and 7th. On this option 1, we're gonna connect North 7th with Hallam, so there's no access to 7th or 8th from State Highway 82 in this configuration. There is still access to, in the bottom corner there is still access to West Main Street and South 7th, like it is today. That stop bar for the left through movement on 82 westbound would be moved about 40 foot east. So what that does is it actually makes a longer trek across the intersection. So that could be a little problematic and a little bit of a concern from a safety standpoint. But when we look at the next option, I want you to also keep in mind that each of these options are kind of plug and play. So we can do some different things, like we could take something from option 1 and put it with option 2, okay? And here's option 2. So this is the one that works with a future 3-lane bridge. And what we would do basically is prioritize the bus movement outbound and carry that across the bridge, and maybe probably take it up to Cemetery Lane and then do a Q jump out of the signal. So that gives the bus priority out of town. With this option, again, we're closing access to 8th Street. We're also closing access from 7th Street onto 82, but we are allowing for an egress in this option to North 7th from outbound 82. So you could get to North 7th on 82 just from the heading west, but you can't get there heading east. What we did on this option is a little bit differently in the lower left or the bottom corner there. With West Main and South 7th, we connected that up and eliminated the access to 82. So remember that stop bar, eliminating that crossing. So this would probably make it safer if we connected that up right there. Again, we still have the impacts to the Christian Science building on the corner there, similar to what we had on the other option. I mentioned the pinch points. This is my pinch point graphic. So our study really was from the east end of the bridge. That's where that first yellow box with the white in it is showing, started the S-curve alternative analysis, and then the end of the S-curve analysis was kind of at 6th Street. So we kind of wanted to look at the pinch points in that area as well as neighboring pinch points, and one that kind of falls outside is that pinch 1, and we'll talk about all of them here. So pinch 1 is basically the Maroon Creek roundabout. While this perpetuates the movement of traffic, there's a lot of traffic, and the high volume constricts the flow and results in congestion. I know there's been some discussions about maybe adding lanes or even bypass lanes, and Jim will talk about that under his NEPA slides, but this is definitely a pinch point, and our S-curves does not take care of that. Pinch point 2 is just the existing 2-lane narrow bridge. I mean, when you approach something that's narrow, it's constricting, and you slow down, it slows everybody down, and that's when sometimes accidents happen. It reduces traveler speed, resulting in queuing and rear-end collisions. Pinch 3 and 4, basically these are the two 90-degree S-curves with the intersecting streets, which impedes traffic flow and introduces conflict points along the way. So we are addressing this through the S-curve options. We are addressing these two pinch points in the options I've shown you, and prioritizing outbound flow by reducing some access. Pinch 5, this is the designated peak period bus lane. This is where the buses merge with local traffic into one lane. Well, with option 1, we would carry that further. We would carry it on up to the existing westbound bus stop that's near 8th, okay? With option 2, we would bring it all the way across the bridge, across a 3-lane bridge. So you're addressing pinch 5 with option 2 in 2 different ways with the options. So Pinch 6, again, this is the zipper lane. Typically, typically traffic doesn't merge from the inside to the outside lane. So what we would do is we change it to merge from the outside to the inside lane. This might be more natural, and it might be less of a pinch point when we're done. So with each of these modifications, there was different elements and impacts for the different options. You know, option 2 might better facilitate outbound traffic flow because it goes all the way across the bridge. Both of them reconfigure the zipper lane. With each option, there's different mature trees that are impacted by the option. There's 15 in option 2. There's 7 in option 1. There's also different right-of-way impacts. There's a couple of pictures there of the trees that I'm sure you're all familiar with out there that would be impacted. Basically, option 1 could be implemented soon. It would work with the 2-lane bridge. It's probably a capital expense of $20 million, but you're still left with a couple of the other pinch points, and it does not address your aging bridge. We would suggest some traffic modeling to quantitatively assess the actual improvements of the outbound traffic flow.
Just so there's no conflict brought up later, that very well could be Ward in his Miata in that picture. That was not planned.
I zoomed in on it, but it's pixelized, so I couldn't really.
You really messed that card on, yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll pause for S-curve questions.
Thank you very much. Phil?
Thanks. Couple questions and maybe opinions. Can you go to the option 2 S-curve graphic, please?
Sure.
Thank you. And then I do have a question, but it's coming next. So, actually, I should start with, I like this a lot, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness that have gone into to all of these studies and all the work that you've all done, particularly this. My concern here is some of the access to the northwest corner of the West End. Basically, anyone who lives on the portion of 8th Street north of 82 will now have to go both in and out of 6th Street and have to go all the way around the Forest Service parcels, and that's quite a long detour. So I would encourage us to explore perhaps, I think the turn onto 8th from 82 is very problematic. So turning north off of 82 onto 8th and 7th is problematic. Perhaps we allow for the right turn or the western turn off of 8th, maybe 7th. But I do agree that the turns to the north are problematic for traffic and may be worth the pain for those residents and the Aspen Meadows and things like that. But I want to consider that carefully. Maybe, perhaps those right turns off of those streets to leave town are not as disruptive to traffic as the turns off of 82 because of crossing the traffic lane.
Yeah, that could be explored.
And then my question, otherwise, I think this generally looks great to me. And I do prefer option 2 to obviously prepare for the future bridge, which I support. And I'll get into that later. But right-of-way acquisition costs. I guess tell me a little bit about how you came up with these costs. Because I'll be forthright, is you're talking about 2,000 square feet of land for more than 6,000 square feet of land has ever sold for in the West End, let alone land on the S-curves.
So we used 2 different unit prices for whether it was right-of-way take or temporary construction easement, and we have both that would be needed. And there's a higher dollar value for the property take, and that was based on a recent city project and the value that was used for that per square foot price.
Well, obviously, we're a long way from that, but I actually think this is overstated, those costs. as far as I know, the record price for a 6,000 square foot vacant lot in the West End with development rights was about $11 million for all 6,000 square feet. So to see 17 million, I said 11 million, or did I say 11,000? I'm not sure, but I meant 11 million. You're saying it could be 17.6 million, which is significantly more, and only for 2,200 square feet. So, anyhow, just wanted to flag that.
Okay.
I think that's it on the S curve stuff for me. Thanks.
I'd actually like to tease that out a little bit more, because when you're talking about properties, right-of-ways, and the like, can you be a little bit more specific about what these suggestions entail? Talking specifically about at the end of Main Street, where it turns outbound, and then I think there's a little curb piece.
Yeah, so most of
Can
the
you just be a little more specific about those?
so most of the takes are in the corners, okay, for the S-curve softening.
Uh-huh.
Those would be the right-of-way takes. When you're on the straightaways, down 7th Street, you got enough width there. We're not expecting any easements, but when you start encroaching on that corner, as you head west, on the inside corner there, you can see we're impacting those trees, and there's some right-of-way takes in there. So there's right-of-way there. There's also some temporary construction easement to reconfigure the sidewalk there. When you get on the straightaway that's further closer to the bridge, those are more TCEs, that temporary construction easements, just to put the driveways back and stuff like that.
Okay. So
We're
this
basically
right here-
talking Christian
So
Science.
there's right-of-way and TCE right there on that corner, as well as the upper corner, inside corner.
Okay. Other questions, S-curve modifications?
Yeah. First off, I'd like to voice support for carrying the bus to the westbound 8th stop. I think that would be massive for this community. Secondly, I was wondering, can option 1 blend into option 2? Can you do option 1 and then, like, continue it into option 2?
Yes.
So you-
Yeah, you could morph into an option 2. We'd probably, what we'd do is we'd set it up so it would work that way. We would design 1, so then you build into 2.
I say that for the obvious reasons of it'd be nice to do something now as we work towards a potential 3-lane bridge.
Yeah, and that's what I said, you could do option 1 soon. So again, these are concepts, right? We need do some more detailed engineering to kind of set it up that way, if that was the preferred. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about if you did want to do a 3-lane bridge and some of the risks associated with that when we talk about NEPA here in a second. Okay.
And lastly, I think this, for my eyes, it looks this way, but it looks like you could have 2 continuous lanes outbound all the way until after the cemetery lane light.
So what we would do is what we plan to do is take it up to Cemetery Lane, 2 outbound lanes, okay? And the outside lane would be a transit lane, okay? And then you give them a queue jump at the light, right? So then they'd move ahead of the general traffic, because that next down to 1 lane before the roundabout then opens back up to 2 lanes, right?
Yeah.
So you shoot them through the light with a transit priority, and then let the other traffic go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
2
yeah,
outbound to the cemetery lane.
Yeah, that's a massive improvement right there. So that'd be great.
Could you explain what that queue jump is in layman's terms, please?
A queue jump is just a priority signal for that bus. So they would get a green only, and they'd be able to go ahead of the general traffic and get moving in front.
Thank you.
I guess lastly too, not that I would do it this way, but do the S curves allow for light rail in the future?
Yes.
Those curves do, okay.
Yeah, so we set this up for,
Saying-
basically, the minimum radius on a light rail is 82 feet. And we're a little bit more conservative. 82 feet, you're gonna get some squeal. So we put it at 100 feet.
No,
Okay.
thank you.
All right.
Okay. The last major scope task that we had was to analyze and summarize NEPA process options. And I feel like I need to apologize in advance. Beth and Doug get to talk about actual potential improvements, whereas I'm left with talking about legal procedural things, which the content might be dry, but I hope and trust that the council finds it useful for their decision-making and trying to determine best paths forward. What is NEPA and why are we discussing it? Let's start with the latter question. Improvements at the bridge and existing 82 need to be considered in relation to the 1998 ROD, which was done to comply with NEPA. Because the ROD remains legally valid, it applies to State Highway 82 now. So the intent of our NEPA process memo and these slides is to address the council's questions on implications for changing the preferred alternative and leaving the record of decision. So what is the National Environmental Policy Act? It was enacted in 1970. It's a collaborative decision-making process that applies to federally funded projects and major actions. It's important to note that it does not dictate or predetermine a particular outcome. In other words, one can initiate a NEPA process with a solution in mind, but that's not what ultimately might come out of that process. And local prime example would be the Grand Avenue Bridge project in Glenwood Springs. When we, as a project team, initiated that NEPA process, most or all of us thought that the solution that would ultimately be built would be replacing the bridge in its then straight location, not the skewed or curved location that exists there now. But that's what culminated from the NEPA process after lots of stakeholder and public engagement. And lastly, NEPA requires that agencies consider their environmental effects of their proposed actions before making decisions, which prior to 1970 wasn't always done. In its simplest form, there are four major key steps in NEPA processes. Scoping, where we look at existing conditions, get public and agency input, and really try to hone in on the transportation purpose and needs that we're trying to address. Secondly, we identify and evaluate alternatives to meet those transportation needs. We assess the impacts from the alternatives and identify mitigation measures. And lastly, NEPA processes culminate in a decision, some sort of decision document. And this flow chart illustrates different ways to document or move forward to comply with NEPA, depending on the scale of the project, and really it all hinges on the significance of the impacts. If we have no or unlikely significant impacts, we can clear that with what's called a categorical exclusion, or CE for short. We get federal lead agency concurrence to end that NEPA process. If the potential for significant impacts are unknown, we would prepare an environmental assessment and receive what's a finding of no significant impacts, if that's the determination. And if we do have significant impacts, or if they're likely, we would prepare an environmental impact statement. Of course, that's what was done back in the 1990s for the entrance to Aspen, and that ended in a record of decision made in 1998. So, who is responsible for decision-making on State Highway 82 improvements? Well, as we all know, CDOT owns and maintains 82. CDOT did receive federal funding to study and implement improvements along 82 from the airport to downtown Aspen. The EIS was initiated back in 1994. The ROD followed 4 years later, and as I mentioned earlier, does remain legally valid. Therefore, any new or altered NEPA process would require CDOT and FHWA oversight and participation. And when it comes to NEPA processes, the federal lead agency, in this case FHWA, is the ultimate decision maker. The timeline below just shows the major milestones for the EIS process. And I'll note that in 2007, there was a reevaluation done on the ROD, and it was determined to still be valid. Yes, sir.
Can I interrupt with a quick one? Thanks. Why is it assumed that this is federally funded, not state funded?
Well, if the city opts to self-fund improvements, that would involve completely leaving the record of decision, then I think that is something where NEPA wouldn't apply. In discussions with staff, for improvements along 82, and for those sort of costs, typically that's a situation where federal funding would be sought. But, as we can talk about later, one option would be to completely remove or leave the record of decision, and NEPA wouldn't apply. So that is a viable option. That would start with a discussion with CDOT and FHWA because, they were parties to that decision. And as mentioned, State Highway 82 is a state route, so they are a major player in whatever happens to that route. So,
Thanks.
Could we just clarify in there, what that likely means is that we fully take responsibility for the bridges and the road networks and devolve from CDOT, which we would want to have some significant conversations around how that funding would happen for both construction and maintenance, given the current revenue sources versus those needs.
thank you.
You have more slides on this?
On,
Just the NEPA process and such?
I do, yes.
Okay. Continue, please.
Thank you. Some considerations for pursuing an alternative that differs from the preferred alternative. Any sort of new EI or NEPA process would involve a new scoping process, and that would be revisiting the original EIS purpose and need and the community goals. Just to briefly touch on those, the original EIS project need really honed in on the insufficiency of the network to address the capacity, particularly during peak periods. There was a project intent to provide a balanced integrated transportation solution. And something that was unique with this EIS relative to others is there were 10 local community objectives identified. And I won't go through all these here. They were identified in the mid-1990s, and council members can judge whether they're still applicable today. But they ranged from livability considerations to practical considerations like finance limitations and phasing and minimizing environmental impacts. Other considerations, leaving the PA would require public engagement. This does provide an opportunity to get community buy-in on a new solution. One thing that that staff heard as part of the community awareness campaign is that many members of the community don't feel that they did have buy-in on the preferred alternative simply because it was from the 1990s. It would require re-engaging other parties, a host of state and federal agencies, Pitkin County, RAFTA, just to name a few, in the decision-making. A NEPA process could be initiated, but a particular alternative might be eliminated for the very same reasons that it was back in the 1990 EIS. CDOT and FHWA have made clear that the city would be responsible to bear the costs of any new EIS or RON. There is a risk that FHWA could request reimbursement for the original EIS costs, including the mitigation that's already been completed out there to implement the preferred alternative. Excuse me. FHWA has noted that changing the original PA decision could increase the risk of litigation. And lastly, the risk of lane closures, weight restrictions, or CDOT implementing the PA does increase over time due to the deterioration of the existing bridge. So this flow chart is our attempt to try to illustrate and simplify a very complicated process, using really implementing the PA as a baseline, if you will, and going from left to right. The different process options, generally speaking, increase in schedule and cost as you go from left to right, but implementing the preferred alternative could be accomplished just by completing a reevaluation of the record of decision. Modifying the PA, if the new impacts would not be significant, could also be done with a reevaluation. If we do have significant impacts, it would require supplemental EIS and a record of decision. And lastly, considering a different alternative would depend on whether or not that alternative was evaluated in detail in the EIS, meaning that the impacts of that alternative were studied in detail. If they were, then that potentially could be cleared with a revised ROD. If that particular alternative was eliminated early in the screening process and not studied in detail, it would require a new EIS, and any new alternative would require a new EIS ROD. So to touch on some of the improvements that have been talked about earlier, those could be cleared as part of a kind of a separate process that doesn't address, of course, the aging bridge, but for example, the S-curve softening that we've been talking about could be cleared with a CADX, which is a relatively quicker, lower cost option. The slip ramp around the roundabout that Doug mentioned earlier could be done with environmental assessment FONSI. And putting those process options to the different rehab and the bridge replacement options that Beth talked about. Bridge rehab is included, our understanding, in the record of decision, so that could be done with a reeval. Whereas the bridge replacement options, really each of them, FHW and CDOT have indicated would require a new EIS ROD. So study costs and relative durations are shown here in a really simplistic form.
Yeah, I don't eat at those restaurants with the $3 signs.
Excuse me. Next slide. And lastly, just to touch again on some key considerations, federally funded improvements on 82 would require CDOT and FHWA participation and compliance with NEPA. City would bear the cost of a new NEPA study, pursuing an alternative that differs from the PA. Agencies can't guarantee a specific outcome once NEPA is initiated, and other parties would be engaged and involved in the decision-making process.
NEPA questions. You want to start? Sam?
Is there, let me put it this way, is there really no legal out of a record of decision that's 25 years old? Because the way I read it in layman's term is like, do the PA or spend a ton of money to do something else, but you better do something from 25 years ago.
Well, yeah, legal out is a tricky one. There are options to modify the record of decision, modify the preferred alternative. You know, the option is available to completely leave the record of decision, but the implications are that would involve a new NEPA study or self-funding it without federal funding. Again, as we talked about earlier, that discussion would have to be had with CDOT and FHWA because 82 is a state-maintained facility. So I don't know that there's an easy answer to your question.
Have we talked to CDOT or FHWA about
Yeah.
because to me, again, we're talking about government bureaucracy versus just what makes sense. And this is where it drives me nuts to just be go to them and say the community gets behind a 3-lane centered bridge or something like that. and it's basically the current configuration, but you need us to do this many years and this much money towards a NEPA evaluation, it just is illogical.
Well, yeah, we have talked to them, so, and maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, in preparing our memo and these slides, we started with, first of all, our understanding and knowledge of the regulations. We referred to the past guidance that CDOT and FHWA have provided to the city, including in that March 2023 letter where they outlined answers to a handful of the city council questions. And we did meet with them, after we outlined, different paths forward and how to process that from a NEPA standpoint. We had a call with CDOT and FHWA just to make sure that our judgments were sound. So I think if, to answer your question, in terms of pursuing a 3-lane bridge replacement, that's not an alternative that was studied in detail in the EIS. So if the city was to want to keep open the option of pursuing federal funding for that bridge replacement in future, it would require a new NEPA process, is what we've heard from CDOT and FHWA staff. Getting to your earlier question, legal out, there's no expiration date on a record of decision. There was a lot of time, money invested in there. There were mitigation costs and mitigation commitments made as part of that record of decision. There was a reevaluation done back in 2007, as I mentioned earlier, on that rod. So I think, I don't want to speak for them, but I feel like CDOT and FHWA believe that decision remains valid and it's a viable solution.
Wasn't there, during COVID, like federal relief or a federal bill passed for infrastructure funding? Does that apply to this bridge?
It could. Yeah, there's been several different laws to boost the investment in infrastructure. So those would all be potential funding sources for.
And let's just for reality check on those dollars though, is there's expiration on them. So with us not having a clear understanding of where there will be improvements made, nor us having entered into any level of design work, makes us very unfavorable in this competitive process for these funds.
The rule of thumb is really that you need those construction, like a schematic level design or 30% design to be really in the hunt for some of those federal dollars. So Sarah's right that you would want to have the direction aligned where you're going before you're applying for those federal funds. You don't want to turn back federal dollars because the likelihood that you would ever get them again is very, very small.
I appreciate that, because,
Hang on.
is there more?
You.
Oh. I appreciate that because I hope as a council we can give direction and start going in the correct direction on this, especially with all this information. From everything I've heard, and this is the last discussion, this is just government bureaucracy at its worst, in my opinion, the NEPA stuff. Even though I would say it's necessary in many contexts, replacing a current configuration bridge to me and having it cost this amount of money and this amount of years is ridiculous. However, everything else I've heard, I feel like we probably could get community consensus around current configuration, 3-lane bridge, softening of S-curves. It really does solve a lot of the problems, and hopefully we can get through this hoop as well.
Before I take any more questions here, could we take 2 seconds, please, and discuss what the preferred alternative is? Because we have depictions in some of these presentations of a 4 lanes, two bus lanes, 2 general traffic lanes, a shoulder, and a transit corridor and stuff. As I looked at the original rod, that was not the original rod's maybe anticipation. So can we just talk a little bit about what is the preferred alternative What is in this process?
Well, the preferred alternative, and Doug, Peter, others, please jump in, but it included a lot of different improvements. And this is really the last major, when we talk about the preferred alternative in this context, it's really just the last major phase. In our S-curve memo, we do have a graphic that shows different improvements that are part of the preferred alternative that have been already implemented.
That's not in there.
Okay, so.
So my question is
So in-
specific.
So
in
specific,
the-
he's specific to what is in the record of decision as far as like 2 travel lanes, 2 bus lanes as a temporary situation until the light rail is in place.
Going along the existing easement across the Merle open space that's shown on that detour graphic that Doug showed previously.
Because original ROD describes a 2-lane parkway across the Merle open space.
Yeah, and there's been different, and the originally you've got the shortened version and then the long version, and then as you went into the MOU, there's been different descriptions. The right-of-way that was purchased through that process included enough space for the 4 and then the light rail, and so that's how the right-of-way or the easement was required across the Merle open space.
Okay, so I'm going to come back at the end of these presentations and ask where those modifications to any original ROD happen and what it would mean for us to minimize that scope from 6 lanes wide down to 2 lanes wide, as was mentioned earlier. All right, other NEPA questions? Bill?
Yeah, I have a specific NEPA question, and then I assume we'll do a round of sort of closing comments. Okay, great. So along the lines of my previous NEPA question, does the state of Colorado also require all of these projects to go through NEPA? Or is that only a federal requirement?
It only applies to projects where there's federal funding or major federal actions like a major permit. So,
And this is obviously not an interstate project, so does that mean that we all just assume that Colorado will seek federal funds to pay for this? I'm just trying to understand what the real ultimate driver of having to go through NEPA is.
yeah. Well, I think think about it in these terms, if there was not a record of decision in place, there could be an option to pursue state or local funds and not have to comply with NEPA. What's complicating about this is there was already an EIS and a ROD done. I think, as I mentioned earlier, there could be discussions had with CDOT and FHWA about exiting the ROD and trying to find a way to self-fund this. But the other complicating factor in that is, as mentioned before, 82 is a state highway and maintained. So I think those discussions would have to be had with CDOT and FHWA if this city council wanted to pursue an option or solution that wouldn't involve any sort of federal funding.
So is there a potential scenario, and is there maybe any precedence for such a scenario, where we abandon that recorded decision, started a new process, not a NEPA process, hopefully, but a new process, and reach some agreement that whatever federal funding would have been supplied in a CDOT partnership scenario would be made up locally? So keeping CDOT as a partner, but dropping federal funding more specifically.
I think that's a question that we would like to ask CDOT. So if that's the direction, we can certainly reach out to our colleagues at CDOT and ask those questions. It's not something that I think that we're prepared to answer this evening.
I'd be very interested in understanding that. Thanks.
Other NEPA questions?
Just respond to Sam's comment about it, and Bill as well. I think that the legal way out of the record of decision is you abandon it and start all over. I mean, that's a legal option. There is a process. You have to go through it. It would delay quite a bit. But it is a legal out. And that would be the way If you don't want accept the record of decision and preferred alternative, it's going to require going through the whole process that's been outlined. And foregoing federal funding, it's going to be a lot of money, just like at the airport. They look at abandoning FAA, and the cost to the community is probably prohibitive, but there is a legal out on it.
Any other questions at this time? Okay, problem statements are in front of us.
Yeah, we'll end with questions for council, and we'll start by going back to the problem statement. What to do with the aging bridge, and how do we address the larger congestion and mobility issues? Can we do them simply by improving State Highway 82? And this last slide, are questions for council that are in the staff's memo to council. They're paraphrased here, but I'll just walk through these, and it's a lot, but yes, sir.
Hang on one second. Because I'm not sure that we can answer these until maybe there's some other questions that we brought up during our meeting today are addressed. Questions that I have, for example, were I'd like to get a little bit more information and some idea of support around the pedestrian route that is on the current alignment and on that bridge. Does that, with all respect to what's been said before about access through pedestrian and bikes, I would like a clearer picture of that. I don't really know the impact of not having a pedestrian crossing at that location and bringing people down 2 blocks, 3 blocks to the other crossing that's existing. That was not presented in any of these options, so I'm wondering about how that changes any of those possibilities for the replacement of the existing bridge. I definitely would like to hear more information about what a smaller footprint across the Meroldt means to this. It has been referred to as a split shot, 2 lanes in, 2 lanes out on existing alignment. I'd like to see that teased out more to see what that looks like or what the possibilities are. For example, does that avoid any property takings or impacts? Does that avoid a 7th and Main traffic light and the like? I'd like to know what kind of modification that is to the record of decision and the preferred alternative, to know if that falls into a modified PA or not. I heard that there was more traffic modeling that needed to be done along any of the S-curve modifications. I think that we had some questions that come up about the actual cost of S-curve modifications. There was a question around S-curve modifications and maintaining a right turn from 7th and 8th onto 82 outbound, but not necessarily moving towards left-hand turns off of 82 into 7th and 8th. I'd like to see a little bit more about that and about the proposed routes. Improvements to the roundabout. I think there are so many unanswered questions about what the effectiveness of any of these opportunities are and what their true impacts will be, both positive and negative, without knowing what is potential for improvements at the roundabout. You may have seen that I laughed when you brought up a slide that said 6 pinch points. Like, we're trying to solve a lot of stuff here. I think that we need more information around that. Where are our opportunities for improvement? We have questions around funding avenues, whether federally funded project or not, and how that it can potentially impact us. I think that part of that question would be to know what the city's capacities could be for any funding on either of these, whether it's bridge rehabilitation and, or repair, to new EISs, to, you know, what is the city looking at and what is our capacity for funding? You answered a little bit about what the actual preferred alternative is, but I still don't know. I don't know within the parameters. We were told that the corridor was maintained as a right-of-way or an easement, but I don't know, do we have to build to that? Does it have to be 130 foot wide, or could it be less than that? And then just the last question that I heard come up was really about abandoning the rod, and I think that comes back to kind of some of the funding questions that we have.
So I think maybe in process-wise, what would be helpful is hear these questions from council. I understand, I'm seeing heads nod, you're not ready to give direction tonight by multiple of you. If I'm misreading that, please let me know. But we would really like to hear what these information requests are, because staff will keep coming back to you. With these bridge ratings, we think it's imperative from our professional opinion that there needs to be a plan that is well communicated to the community and with our partners about what's going to happen. So if we would, Mr. Mayor, if you would consider continuing to bring those questions forward from the council, and then we'll take a look at the work session agenda to schedule time for that, as well as any debate then, once that information's brought back.
Bill?
Tori, thanks for recapping all those questions. I do agree that I would like to have the information from most of those before giving definitive answers on my opinions. I'd also like to say that this information that was presented was great. It was really comprehensive. It was easy to understand. Your presentation helped sort of close the gap on a lot of my last questions. And as unexcited as I am for a failing bridge, I'm excited to be making progress on this. My one criticism is that I wish we were talking about this a little bit more holistically. You know, we've talked about this traffic flow improvement study from as far as the intercept lot to the core, and I wish that I could give my opinions, and I hope that there's a way that I can give my opinions on each component of a holistic plan when I understand what the holistic plan and recommendations are. So I'm hopeful that I don't want to kick the can down the road, but I would like to understand how each of these, what I think are very connected elements, interact with one another. You know, I do have some general sentiments that I want to share with you without saying they are my final opinions, but I have one question before I do that. On the shifted 3-lane, we would be able to maintain two lanes of traffic, understanding that there are some risks presented, right? But the idea is that we'd be able to maintain 2 lanes of traffic throughout construction and not need that temporary bridge through Merle. Is that correct?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying that. So again, my general sentiment at this point is I do like most of option 2 of the S-curve softening. I do like the 3-lane shifted. I think that those could significantly help with a lot of our issues. I don't think that they will solve for traffic. I don't think anything will solve for traffic in Aspen, but I do think they will meaningfully improve upon traffic and be worthwhile investments. I think that's what I had to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. Other questions that we need more information for before we can give a little bit more direction in which, how we want to approach this? You know, it's not black and white here. There, you know,
The direction I would get at this point is not to proceed with softening or with the existing alignment that we've spent a lot of time, a lot of months and money and studies, and received a lot of good input from your team on the existing alignment. But we need to fully explore what we can do with the record decision, the preferred alternative, maybe modify the preferred alternative without reopening the whole process. But ultimately, I think it comes down to, we have a community that is indecisive or split. I mean, this has been going on for over 40 years, and at some point, we're gonna have to make a decision, we're gonna have to go forward. And there are gonna be people in the community that aren't agree with it, but what I think we need as a community looking to the future is to get behind what the community wants after a full evaluation of what the alternatives are, the costs are, the timeframe. Because I would say community acceptance is roughly 50-50 between some different alternatives. And, you know, we've got to know what it costs to abandon federal funds. So, but again, I want to see a full, open review of what we have, what Tori mentioned about the record decision preferred alternative, to weigh it against with the in-depth information you've provided us on the existing alignment. But at this point, I'm not supporting going forward with softening S-curves or proceeding with the understanding that we're going to use the existing alignment, because I'm just not there yet. And I will go back to what the community concerns were back in the 90s. I think that they were, for the most part, in agreement with what the, what was it, 2016, 2017 Aspen Institute studies were, that we make community value-based decisions. And the first thing we did in that 15-month process was to identify what the values were, and safety was in phasing and financial limitations. A lot of these things that are listed back in the 90s, I think, are still valuable and accepted today. So, although 30 years may have gone by, community values are somewhat the same, but my guess is eventually we're going to have another vote, and that we as a community, I think we just have to decide that what the outcome of that vote is that's the direction we're going to go in.
John?
Yeah, just want to start by saying, obviously from the photos in the packet, our current Castle Creek Bridge needs attention, and it needs it soon. That's just a fact. It also, during this discussion tonight, it seems like if we leave the record of decision, it's going to cost us, our community, a tremendous amount of time and money. And I think Ward was right in comparing that to the airport. We are, to a certain extent, being held hostage by this. I did like what I saw today with some of the three-lane bridge options. But I do really feel that this is a decision that's got to be made by our voters. And that's all I have to say about it tonight.
Thanks, John. Sam, comments?
Yeah.
And specifically, are there any other requests for information or exploration that you have?
Yeah, I'll give you two questions. I don't think it's ever been established whether we needed a vote for the preferred alternative to go through the rural open space. I'm not sure if that was something that had to go to the voters.
From the perspective of CDOT, the answer is no. You as a council may hold a different opinion on that. I don't believe that there's been a collective position of any council since I've been here on that matter, but the state feels the preferred alternative in the record of decision is final and has provided all the public input opportunity that should, and quite frankly, in my opinion, was quite excessive compared to other NEPA processes I've been through, what they did back in the 90s.
We were waiting for, I think, our city legal to opine on that question, weren't we?
I thought we were. That's why I was asking.
You know, Kate?
There was questions about that, and right now, we haven't jumped into the meeting with those legal entities until we knew kind of what the process is from our council and direction prior to leaving that.
But would you please add that to, as a question for information?
Is that
Thank you.
okay?
Cost of two-lane temporary bridge was something I was wondering, and also with this, all this NEPA stuff as we work through it, is the delay gonna make it so our bridge goes under a 5 or a 50 status and we start feeling those repercussions? I just wanted to say, we faced criticism for doing this study. I thought this was very valuable information, but I do hope myself and the rest of the council can make decision off of it. I feel more or less prepared to, like I was saying earlier, process of elimination. I mean, I do think this was a topic of conversation during all of our elections, and I think that's why we were elected to do this, so there was a community vote on this, and if it does go to like a referendum, it better be a forced choice one, not a yes or no one, because we're gonna end up wasting everyone's time with that. Like I was saying earlier, my values eliminate things like the preferred alternative, because I really don't want to touch the Merle open space. I do think that's sacred. 75 years from now, I think it's still open space. We worry about growth and development here. There's been comparisons to the airport. I think the current configuration is actually the one that meets those community values the best, because it is not necessarily growth in that way of like taking away green space. It's just growth in the sense that it helps with traffic improvements, especially out of town, which helps with evacuation routes and other things, so it's only a net positive in my mind. Like I was saying, the 2-lane replacement does not make sense at all, because why spend all that money just to have the same thing? The rehabilitation does not make sense to me, other than the NEPA stuff, because why rehab it from a 5 to a 6? The bridge does need to be replaced. From my point of view, it seems like with all these questions, once they're answered, the 3-lane centered, faster, maybe a temporary bridge, maybe a shifted, depending on the consequences of those right-of-way issues. I think that's the direction I would love to see this council go, if we can get consensus around it. But like, I think there's a lot of logic there, and the work that you guys did to help me reach that conclusion, I appreciate, and I don't think we wasted money on you. So I really wanted to say that, because it was criticized, but it should be criticized if we don't end up making a decision off of the information you gave us. So I wanted to just state that, but thank you so much.
Thanks, Sam. I shared my questions with you. A couple have been added to it. I think before we go further, that we would like to have another work session where those answers come back to us for a little bit more clarity. I want to thank everybody that's here in the room tonight. I really appreciate you coming to a work session, knowing that we don't necessarily take public comment at these, but I want to encourage you to give us your input. You sat here through this meeting, you heard a lot of the same things that we heard, so please, the easiest way for you is to send an email to citycouncil@aspen.gov. That goes to all of us.
It's just council.
Council? I think they both do. Council@aspen.gov. So please give us more of your input. I also wanted to say that we did receive a few emails over the past week that we have, I believe, all had a chance to digest. So thank you to those community members that gave us input ahead of time. Yeah, I think that this deserves a little bit more discussion. I think that our community is looking at the realistic opportunities here, and I think that people will be able to make a decision one way or another. Whether that aligns to 50-50 like Ward is saying or not, we'll see. But I think with the next round of information that we're gonna get, we'll have a much clearer picture of what our alternatives are. Follow up in clarity?
Clarity, please. Does council support a traffic model, essentially, that's in a holistic plan similar to what Bill suggested, where it goes outside of the scope of just the bridge? It would also look at the right turns compared to non-right turns. Is council interested in getting the quantitative piece for some of these decisions?
Yes.
Not at this point, but I think holistically, there have been a lot of that have been pointed out between Buttermilk and in town that have been accomplished already. So it was holistically approached. And it was brought up in one of the slides with the green things that color coding that had already been accomplished. So, yeah, but if you want to do it holistically, you're going to look at the I-70 corridor all the way up. But our purview is the entrance to Aspen.
Can you give us a little more detail? What are you talking about? Modeling as?
Modeling from essentially our impact zone from Brush Creek into town and out of town, to look at it holistically as he described? Or do you just want to model that kind of looks at the immediate impact of S-curves to the bridge compared to the alternatives?
My reasoning for it, if I may, is I don't want to just move the bottleneck, right? I think that the roundabout needs to be looked at. I think that the cemetery lane light needs to be looked at. You know, moving a little further out, some of the merges that we have. I think that if we only solve for part of this, we're just pushing the problem. We're not really improving this as much as we could. And some of these are outside of the city limits. I understand that. But I think it gives us a way to have a conversation with both CDOT and Pitkin County, in addition to ourselves, that gets us thinking about the whole problem, not just part of the problem.
Yeah. So Pete, I shared with you that I was interested in more information about improvements to the roundabout as well as the 7th and 8th right turns onto 82 and the like. So, I mean, my answer is yes.
Okay.
But I don't know what you're talking about. Are you talking about another contract to be let out for 3D modeling that we've seen in the
No,
past?
not to
or
that level.
you're
It
just
would,
talking about adding this into the scope as we get to our next work session. So I am in favor. I think that there's other things. And I was wondering if we were gonna even get into those conversations, but items like, and I'm wondering, are you talking about items that may fall outside the current record of decision?
they would probably, well, some of the decisions might, yeah. That you've indicated as your counsel.
Okay. All right. Yes, I'm supportive of the request.
Yes.
Sam is too.
Yes.
Yeah. So we would like that scope increased. Any other questions there from you, Pete?
No, I think I'm good.
Awesome.
My final piece is to set some expectations. The information you're asking for, I just want to be realistic with you, is some of these are questions that FHWA and CDOT may very well choose not to answer. They will say it would be premature for them to answer them. We will still ask, we will prod, we will encourage, but just to manage expectations here, particularly around walking away from federal funding, I anticipate they are not used to that question. So it's new territory for them to contemplate it, which will take us in interacting with some of the highest levels of CDOT probably. The other thing is based on the information I've heard and wanting to come back to you, we'll give you an idea on schedule. I think the earliest would be maybe July. Look, they're already like, that's tight.
We can try.
So just again, to manage expectations, this additional information request is at least a 90-day delay in your next conversation.
I think we accept that, knowing the gravity of the situation, the decisions that we're about to make or hopefully about to make. I hope it's communicated with CDOT and anybody else, FHWA and such, that, what we're looking for as a council and as a community are efficient, effective, and community-supported solutions. So, we come at this not as adversaries to people that have spent so much time on the process to this point, but really we're looking at moving this forward as the most effective way that we can. So hopefully that's communicated with all these requests.
One more.
Yep, Sam?
Just thinking that we're delaying it by 90 days, I just want, I'm just food for thought thinking right now as far as when it does come back to us, I almost want to answer, how are we going to handle it as far as getting it to a forced choice decision so that's not delayed further. I just wanted to say that out loud as far as, yeah, I know can't answer it right now, but I just hope, it's so easy to say yes or no on all these things. What's harder is to actually decide.
For whatever it's worth, I'm committed to trying to make a decision as well, as
Yeah.
soon as possible.
I'm gonna wait to see what information comes back to me, and that'll kind of give me a timeline for what's gonna happen. Is my intention to make a decision when I have all the information I need? Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe that'll be at the next meeting. All right. No other points for clarification? To our team, we appreciate what you guys have brought to us. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions for us as you may continue some of this work? Okay,
No, but thank you for your time.
thank you. Thanks. All right, that is our work session for this evening. We want to say thank you to GrassRoots, like we always do, and we want to remind you that we have a regularly scheduled meeting that accepts public comment at the outset, so please join us tomorrow, 5 p.m. here at City Council Chambers. Thank you. Good job, you guys.
Yeah. Good job. Good job.